Welcome to the Behind Beliefs and Behaviors podcast, where we take you on a journey of what is behind the specific beliefs and behaviors that impact individuals and organizations. With our guests, we get to the root cause of what stands in the way of everything from health, wealth, and relationships to leadership, community transformation, and societal progress. From topics on leadership, psychological safety, corporate culture and communication, to parenting, trauma, relationships, personal health, and intimacy, this podcast is sure to get you to the source and provide you practical tips to transform your life one root cause at a time. I am your host, Dr. Maisha Claiborne. I'm a physician, a coach, a consultant, and an expert in trauma-informed communication. The founder of the Mind Remapping Company, I help individuals and organizations better understand the brain, behavior, and the root of false beliefs so that you can more effectively listen, communicate, connect, and create fulfilling relationships and results in your personal and professional life. Join us every Monday morning at 8 a.m. and let's get to the root cause and discover what's behind your beliefs and behaviors. Hello. Welcome back to another episode. Dr. Maisha here, very excited to be having this conversation because you all know I love talking about communication. And if you have heard any of my talks, if you've listened to my podcast in the past, if you've listened to any of my lives or follow me on social media, I am always talking about that 7%, right? Words are only 7% of our communication. And I have said time and time again that there's another whole 93% that we're missing when we focus only on the words that someone is speaking. And often I talk about this in the context of listening. And so today I want to dig a little bit deeper into that and talk about the impact. I think what most people don't understand is that there is an impact when we're unaware of what we're communicating with that 93%. And for those of you who may not know, that 93%, it comprises of our facial expressions, of our tone of voice, the velocity, the volume of which we speak, the timbre of our voice. It is comprised of our body language and even some of the micro expressions that our brain can detect, but maybe our conscious eyes don't detect on a regular basis when we're interacting with people. So I think it's important to understand that 93% is just as important, if not more important, than the words that are coming out of our mouth. And I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But what I want to share is that when we're interacting with people, and of course, when we're digitally conversing by email, by text, that whole 93% gets lost, which is why sometimes you'll hear me say that text communication is not comprehensive communication, is not total communication, right? And so when we are interacting with people, whether it's on a screen, whether we're talking on the phone, whether we're face to face, the nonverbal cues that we are giving off actually get registered before the verbal cues oftentimes. And in my trainings that I do, and especially in the coach trainings, when I'm teaching the nuances of how to listen to and how to communicate nonverbally, we actually do an exercise where there is no talking, but there is communication inside of that talking, and you get to experience in the body what that feels like. So when we are interacting with people, that nonverbal communication, it gets registered way before the words that are coming into our nervous system get processed, get decoded, and get filtered out. It's important to understand that because one of the big things that can happen in communication that can sabotage effective communication is when our nonverbal cues do not match our verbal cues. So congruence is a thing that, or incongruence in communication is a thing that the brain can detect unconsciously before one can detect it consciously. So I don't know if you've ever been in conversation with someone, been talking with someone, and they might be saying all the right things, but you get this sort of weird, funny feeling inside, and you can't put your finger on it, but that feeling's like, something's off about this communication, or something's off about the way this person is interacting with me. And we might call it an intuition, or we might call it a gut feeling. But what it really is, it's the unconscious mind actually detecting incongruence. And so when you detect incongruence in another person, oftentimes that can set off your internal threat detection alarms, and it can create that discomfort. And then it's hard to fully listen to somebody when your walls are up, when you're armored up. Similarly, you may be putting off incongruent communication as well. So, how then do you project the congruence of your insides and your outsides, if that makes sense? How do you make your body language match the words that you're saying and the intention of what you're trying to communicate? Because sometimes we're unaware that what we're portraying, what we're displaying, may be incongruent with what our intention is, or with the words that we're speaking that are coming out of our mouth. And sometimes we are communicating from an incongruent place. So, one of the first ways that you can begin to create congruence in your communication is to make sure that you're communicating from an authentic place, right? Sometimes we say yes when we mean to say no. Sometimes we're biting our tongue and we're holding back. Sometimes we don't even know what we want. We're just communicating based on what we think another wants to hear. And that incongruence can get picked up and detected by another. So I say that the first place to start is understanding, what are my values? What is important to me? What do I intend to communicate in this interaction? The second is to be authentic in that. Even if you have to pause, even if you have to take a moment. One of the things that can happen in this society is that we get rushed into communication before we're ready to speak, or before we're ready to interact. And one of the skills that can happen when you begin to be grounded and understand how effective communication really works, and when you begin to be confident and understand your own values and what's important to you and listen a different way, is to slow yourself down and to to take control of the pace, and to drive the pace of the conversation. And so when someone asks you a question, oftentimes in society, we're compelled to answer quickly. That's conditioning. If someone asks you a question and you need to think about it, and this especially is the case for my fellow introverts, you can take a moment to say, I'm thinking about it. So you can cultivate an answer that feels congruent with what you're actually feeling, rather than trying to muddle your way through it. That makes sense. And so, even if you're a person who normally answers quickly, or a person who normally says yes, I would recommend practicing a pause, practicing taking a breath. And that allows your nonverbal communication to catch up with what's about to come out of your mouth, so that you can communicate more congruently in the space. Okay. So that's the first place that I would start. Now, the second place is to actually watch yourself, watch your communication, maybe do a little mirror work. And I know that for some people that sounds contrived, but if you are finding that when you're communicating and your intention to communicate is one way, and maybe it's received another way, and that's consistently across the board, across demographics, across family members contexts, right? This is not just you're communicating to someone who may be fragile, and then they misinterpret the communication. But if you're communicating and you're noticing there's a consistent misunderstanding, I would do some mirror work. I would record yourself and see if there's something in the way that your facial expression, or something in the way that your body language is communicating, that's incongruent with your authentic self. Now, notice I'm saying incongruent because there's not a right way to be or a wrong way to be. I'm not suggesting that you should communicate and you should look a certain way when you're communicating. What I'm suggesting is if there's congruence of intention and your body language and your words, then the message comes across. The heart of the message comes across. And then if it's received the wrong way, we can open up the conversation for clarification. This is what I'm saying, and I hope this makes sense. And so, an example of this is I was in the car and I was talking to my son, and I was talking very passionately about a subject, right? Now, my son in the back seat could only see the back of me and could only hear the tone of my voice. And so at some point, he said, "Mommy, are you upset with me?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not upset with you." And so I said, "Well, what made you think that?" And he says, "Well, you were talking and it seemed like you were raising your voice, and I didn't feel like I had done anything wrong." And so, in my passionate speaking about this subject, and I was speaking to him, but I wasn't speaking at him, I mistakenly portrayed that I was upset. So then I had to backtrack and clarify and say, "Oh, no, I'm not upset with you. I think I was just passionately speaking and that made my voice raise. And so, no, I'm absolutely not mad. I'm absolutely not upset. And I apologize that it came off that way." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And then we were good. Right. So that's like a on the court example of how sometimes there wasn't congruence because there was an unawareness that once I got into the emotion, there was an awareness of the way it was coming off with my son, even though I was speaking from an authentic place. So this is very nuanced, and these are some of the things that I teach when I do workshops on communication, when I do full trainings, and in my communication that transforms course online training that I have. These are some of the nuances, and we go much, much, much deeper in this setting. But the thing that I want you to take away is that it's the incongruence, and this is just one of the things, right? This is just one of the impacts that can happen when we're unaware of the 93% that we're communicating. Now, on the flip side, if we are unaware of the 93% of the nonverbal language that's being communicated to us, then we can totally miss a message and misinterpret a message. And it's useful if we are bristled or if we receive something a particular way that doesn't land to ask for clarification. This is how that landed. Is that what you intended? And so it's the congruence with which someone speaks. That's one of the things, the congruence with which one speaks that gets picked up by the brain and gives us that spidey sense or that intuitive feel that something is off, or gives us the intuitive click of congruence that has us lean in to communication and has the intention be transmitted, or the energy of the communication be like effectively transmitted to the person who's listening. So what do you do with this? What do you do with this information? You practice. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out into your social circles, whether it's your household, into your leadership circles. And I want you to start, as you listen to words that are coming out of a person's mouth, also watch their body language, watch their facial expressions, watch and do this consciously, because there may be some people saying, "Well, I already do this naturally. I already am picking up nonverbal signals." But I want you to be very intentional about doing that. Notice what you can notice about someone's facial expression and the congruence with what's coming out of their mouth. Notice what you can notice about someone's tone of voice and the words that they're speaking. And sometimes the tone of voice and the volume of voice can vary culturally. And that's important to know, because if you're not aware of the variations culturally, then you may misinterpret based on your own filters of what you've been taught is culturally appropriate. So this is the other thing we must understand. So when we're listening to someone's tone of voice and their cadence and their body language, you want to also keep in mind that there may be some cultural influence, and we want to honor that cultural influence. And if you misinterpret that 93%, or if you feel some kind of way about that 93%, that feels a little bit, what's the word, incongruent, or maybe that feels different from what you're used to being communicated, then all you need to do is ask for clarification. And if you're the one being asked, you can ask for clarification about the clarification as well. Are you asking because you actually want to know, or are you asking? So these are the ways that you open up communication. And the point here is, if we put some of our inquiries about what we're receiving on loudspeaker and make those clarifications, we can resolve a lot of conflict before it begins. We can resolve so much in communication, in our listening. And that is a lot of what I am committed to do. This is a lot of what I teach. So that being said, go out and notice body language, but more so than just noticing body language and noticing tone of voice and noticing facial expressions and noticing volume and noticing head movement and eye movement and all of those things, more than just noticing that, notice the congruence with which it happens with the words that a person is speaking. That's the next level of listening. Okay. And of course, I'd love to hear from you, hear what you're discovering, hear what you're noticing. You can message me directly on any of the platforms you may be listening through. You can leave a comment on the podcast when the podcast becomes active. You can leave a comment on the social media platform with which you're listening. And you can always learn more about the work that I'm doing, helping leaders to listen and communicate beyond misunderstandings, and to be able to create environments where people feel heard, feel valued, feel respected, feel seen. And I'm available to come and do workshops, to do speaking engagements. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can see here, if you're watching the video, there is a website. Please go to that website. If you're listening, it's mindremappingacademy.com. Or you can reach out to me directly through any one of the platforms. Personally, LinkedIn is my favorite, but I'm on most of the platforms. Or you can reach out to me on my email, drmaisha@drmaisha.com. All right. And so go practice. Let me know how it goes. And until I speak to you all again, stay empowered. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We know that without the listeners, there is no podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe so you do not miss when we drop our next episode. And share this podcast with a friend, a family member, and a colleague, at least one person in your life today. This episode was brought to you by the Mind Remapping Company, helping organizations create psychologically and emotionally safe cultures that make their employees and leaders feel seen, heard, respected, welcome, and valued, all while fostering a thriving, engaged, and healthy workforce for the organization. Is your organization in need of a speaker? I speak about topics like psychological and emotional safety, trauma-informed communication, and employee well-being. If this is aligned with your organizational inclusion, belonging, or leadership goals, contact me, Dr. Maisha, by going to www.mindremappingacademy.com. That's mindremappingacademy.com. Finally, we train leaders, but we also train coaches. If you're interested in becoming a trauma-informed coach, visit our website as well and check out our NLP coach trainings and certifications. We'll see you on the next episode. Until then, stay empowered.